Zoe Johnson had always been proud of the work she did. For years, she'd been a part of the cleaning team at one of the largest corporations in the city. Each day, she woke up early, put on her uniform, and made her way to the office building, knowing that her work, though often unseen, was essential. She cleaned the floors, wiped down the desks, scrubbed the bathrooms, and made sure every corner of the office was spotless. It was hard work, but it was honest work. Zoe was no stranger to challenges. Raised in a small neighborhood, she'd learned early on the value of determination. Her family had come to the city looking for better opportunities, and Zoe had taken every chance that came her way to improve her life. She had grown up multilingual, fluent in both English and Spanish, and had learned to navigate the complexities of different cultures and languages, a skill that had served her well in the diverse workplace. Yet, despite her contributions, Zoe often found herself overlooked. As the years passed, she watched others in the company, people she knew from her department, people who she had trained or mentored, climb the ranks. Promotions, new opportunities, and recognition seemed to pass her by without a second thought. At first, she didn't question it. Perhaps she wasn't the best fit for the higher-level roles she thought. Maybe there were others more qualified, more experienced, or more suited to those positions. But as time wore on, Zoe began to notice something troubling. It wasn't just about skill or qualifications. There was something else at play, something unspoken that shaped the decisions being made behind closed doors. She'd hear snippets of conversations in the break room or see glimpses of internal emails that hinted at a different kind of world. The world of promotions, meetings, and opportunities that seemed closed off to her. Zoe watched as her colleagues, many of whom she had worked alongside for years, received opportunities for advancement. Some of them, who had only recently joined the company, were suddenly given leadership positions. Some were promoted even though they had less experience and fewer skills than her. She kept her head down, focusing on her work, trying to remain optimistic, but the disparity became harder and harder to ignore. It wasn't just the promotions. Zoe had a quiet pride in her job, and the recognition she received for her dedication meant a lot to her. She'd always try to go above and beyond, even if it wasn't in her job description. She took on extra tasks, cleaned up areas others neglected, and made sure everything was spotless. But that was the thing. No one ever really saw her. Her hard work, her commitment, her contributions, they all went unnoticed. Instead, the spotlight seemed to shine on others who, in Zoe's eyes, didn't seem to put in half the effort she did. She knew it was partly because she was part of the cleaning staff, a group often relegated to the background of the office's operations. But she also began to feel something more troubling, a sense that her place in the company had been predetermined long ago. Her role, her race, and her background seemed to confine her to the lower rungs of the corporate ladder, no matter how much she tried to climb. It was as if there was an invisible barrier she couldn't break through, no matter how hard she tried. Zoe was not one to give up easily, and she often reminded herself that her worth was not defined by the position she held at work. But the sting of seeing others rewarded for work that seemed less demanding, less impactful, began to erode her spirit. She had dreamed of more, a chance to manage, to lead, to have her ideas heard. She had put in the hours, worked tirelessly, and sacrificed so much to get to where she was, but the promotion opportunities seemed to pass her by. One afternoon, Zoe overheard a conversation between a group of her colleagues in the break room. They were discussing an upcoming internal promotion, and Zoe's name wasn't even mentioned. Instead, the conversation centered around another staff member, someone who had been with the company for a much shorter time than Zoe. The person was being groomed for a managerial position, and the more Zoe listened, the more disheartened she became. The reasons given for the promotion, experience, ambition, the right attitude, felt like hollow excuses. Zoe had all those qualities, but it seemed like those qualities didn't matter as much as the others. The realization hit her like a cold wave. It wasn't just that she was overlooked, it was that her potential had been dismissed entirely, as if the system had already decided that people like her would never make it to the top. She didn't have the right connections, the right background, or perhaps the right look. Zoe wasn't naive enough to think that her identity had nothing to do with the situation. The subtle, unspoken biases had crept into every decision, every opportunity. And it wasn't just about race or gender. It was about class, about where you came from, about how others perceive your place in the world. Zoe knew she had to change something. She couldn't continue to let her efforts be ignored. But as the frustration built up inside her, she found herself at a crossroads. She could either keep her head down, continue doing her work and accepting the way things were, or she could speak up, challenge the system, and demand the respect she deserved. Zoe stood in front of the office building that morning, the weight of the decision heavy on her shoulders. The sun was barely up, casting a pale golden glow over the city. She had always loved the early mornings. There was a certain stillness before the rush of the day that gave her a sense of peace. But today, that peace felt distant, almost unreachable. Today, everything was different. As she made her way inside, the familiar hum of the office building greeted her. She passed by the sleek glass walls, the polished floors, and the workers bustling around, all too busy to notice her presence. It was the same routine, day in and day out. Yet today, her eyes fell sharper, more aware of the invisible walls that seemed to separate her from everyone else. Zoe didn't want to be angry, but the frustration kept rising inside her. She had spent years working in this building, making sure every surface was clean, every corner was spotless. But it felt like her efforts, her hard work, were never truly valued. She wasn't just the cleaning staff. She was a person with ideas, with potential, with dreams that reached far beyond the mop and broom she held in her hands. But no one saw that. She remembered when she first joined the company. She had been eager, driven by the promise of growth and opportunity. She had hoped that, eventually, her hard work would be recognized, that the barriers that existed between her and those in higher positions would come down. But with every year that passed, those hopes seemed to fade further into the background. Zoe often sat in the break room during lunch, quietly observing her colleagues, wondering how they had managed to climb the ladder while she remained stuck. They were the ones who got to sit in meetings, discuss strategies, and plan for the future of the company. Meanwhile, she was left to clean up the aftermath of their decisions. She wasn't complaining. She loved her job, and she knew it was important. But something inside her had begun to change. She no longer wanted to just be a silent observer. She had tried to stay optimistic, to focus on her work, telling herself that it was enough. But as she watched the latest round of promotions being handed out, her optimism began to wither. She had seen the emails. She had heard the whispers in the hallway. The people being promoted were often those who had been with the company for a fraction of the time Zoe had. They were given leadership roles, the kind of position Zoe had longed for, without so much as a glance in her direction. She knew she had the experience, the skills, and the dedication to take on more responsibility. But every time she tried to assert herself, to voice her desire for more, it felt like she was met with silence. It wasn't just the lack of recognition. It was the way her contributions were dismissed without consideration. It was the way people looked past her, as if she didn't belong in the room with them. Zoe was tired of being invisible. She was tired of feeling like the world had already decided her place, that her background, her role, and her gender would always keep her in the shadows. And the worst part was, she didn't even know if anyone would believe her if she spoke up. She had seen how others were treated when they tried to challenge the system. The whispers, the cold stares, the subtle ways they were pushed aside. Zoe wasn't sure she could bear to become another nameless face in a long list of people who had tried and failed. But something inside her had shifted. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she couldn't just let this continue. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to just accept her place without a fight. There had to be a way to make her voice heard. She didn't need to be a manager or a director. She just wanted a chance, just one chance, to prove that she could be more than just the person cleaning the office floors. That afternoon, Zoe found herself standing in front of the HR department. Her palms were sweaty, her heart racing. She had rehearsed what she was going to say over and over in her head, but now that she was standing there, it felt real, too real. She could hear her own breath, shallow and quick, and the pounding of her heart was the only sound that filled her ears. She was about to knock on the door when she hesitated. A voice in her head urged her to turn around, to walk away. It would be easier, wouldn't it? Easier to just go back to her work, to keep her head down and hope that things would eventually change. But Zoe knew she couldn't do that anymore. She couldn't keep waiting for someone else to recognize her worth. She had to be the one to speak up. With a deep breath, Zoe knocked. The door opened, and she was greeted by a woman she didn't recognize, someone from another department. The woman looked her up and down, a faint look of confusion crossing her face as if she couldn't quite place Zoe's role in the office. But Zoe stood her ground. "I need to talk to someone about a promotion," Zoe said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. The woman raised an eyebrow, but gestured for Zoe to come in. The room was sterile, filled with the faint smell of paper and coffee, the kind of room where hard decisions were made behind closed doors. Zoe could feel the weight of those decisions in the air, but she didn't back down. "I've been working here for a long time," Zoe began, "and I've seen so many people move up in the company. I've worked hard, and I've always done my job to the best of my ability. But it feels like no matter how much I put in, I'm always overlooked. I'm here because I need to know why." The woman sat down, crossing her arms. "Zoe, isn't it? I know who you are. You've been with the company for years. But these decisions aren't always straightforward. Promotions are based on a lot of factors, and we have to make sure the right fit is in place for each role." Zoe nodded, but something inside her snapped. "I understand that, but I'm not asking for anything I haven't earned. I've done everything you asked, and I've gone above and beyond. So tell me, what more do I have to do?" The woman looked at Zoe, her eyes scanning her face. For a moment, Zoe wondered if her words were getting through, if the woman would finally see her for who she truly was, a capable, dedicated employee who deserved more than the shadows. But as the silence lingered, Zoe realized that this wasn't just about one conversation or one person. It was about a system that had never truly seen her as anything more than a cleaner. And she was done being invisible. Zoe walked out of the HR office, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. She had said her piece, but somehow she didn't feel any better. The woman in HR hadn't given her any concrete answers, just vague reassurances and promises of future considerations. It wasn't what Zoe had hoped for. She wasn't asking for guarantees, but at the very least, she had wanted to feel heard. Instead, it felt like she had spoken into a void. But the conversation, however frustrating, had planted a seed inside her. Zoe couldn't just drop it. She couldn't walk away and let it be over. As she continued her shift, the hours passed like they always did. The steady rhythm of her cleaning routine became a familiar, almost meditative process. But today, every swipe of the mop, every dusting of shelves felt different. The tasks she once performed with ease now felt like reminders of how far removed she was from the decisions being made in the polished offices just a few floors above her. The division between the people who made the rules and those who followed them felt more pronounced than ever. But Zoe couldn't let it consume her. She had to find a way to break through, to prove she was more than just a background figure in the daily operations of the building. She had seen too many colleagues, people with less experience, people who didn't care about the job, rise through the ranks while she had remained stuck. And she wasn't the only one. She had spoken to other members of the cleaning crew, the kitchen staff, the security guards. They all shared the same frustrations, the same feeling of being invisible. They were all part of the same unspoken hierarchy, where those who did the physical labor were considered less important, their voices drowned out by the noise of corporate decisions made from afar. As Zoe passed by the management office on her way to clean the restroom, she overheard snippets of a conversation through the thin walls. A group of managers were talking about the next round of promotions. Their voices carried easily, each word cutting through her like a blade. She caught the name of a colleague, someone she knew well, someone who had started around the same time as her. The name was followed by a list of reasons why this person deserved the promotion. Experience, dedication, leadership potential, everything Zoe had, everything she had worked so hard to build. And yet, that colleague who had spent more time on social media than at their desk was getting the promotion. Zoe could feel her pulse quicken, her hands tightening around the cleaning supplies she held. The bitterness bubbled up inside her, but she pushed it down. She had heard enough. She couldn't stand by and watch this happen any longer. That night, after her shift, Zoe went home and sat in the quiet of her apartment, the weight of the day pressing down on her chest. She had always kept to herself, never one to speak out, always waiting for someone else to make the first move. But she realized now that she couldn't afford to wait anymore. She had to take control of her own destiny. No one was going to hand her the recognition she deserved. If she wanted to be seen, she would have to make it happen herself. The next morning, Zoe stood in front of her bathroom mirror, taking in a deep breath. She wasn't sure how this would turn out, but for the first time in a long while, she felt something stir inside her. A spark, a determination that had been buried for so long, was beginning to ignite. She had spent far too long letting her hard work speak for itself, hoping someone would notice. It was time to stop hoping. She needed to make herself impossible to ignore. She grabbed her phone and typed out an email to her supervisor, asking for a one-on-one meeting. She kept it professional, concise, and to the point. No emotions, no complaints, just a simple request to discuss her career path and what opportunities might be available. Zoe clicked send before she could second-guess herself. Her heart raced as she stared at the screen, waiting for a response. Within an hour, she received a reply, confirming a meeting the following day. The knot in her stomach tightened, but she knew this was it. This was the moment where she would either accept the reality of being overlooked for the rest of her career or fight for the chance she deserved. The following day, Zoe sat in the small conference room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her supervisor, Mark, entered with a forced smile, taking a seat across from her. Mark was one of the few people who had always been kind to her, but Zoe knew that kindness only went so far. He was a part of the system that kept her where she was, a system that seemed to value everything except the hard work she put in every day. "So, Zoe, what's on your mind?" Mark asked, his tone casual, but there was a hint of hesitation in his eyes. He knew this wasn't a routine check-in. Zoe took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about my role here," she began, her voice steady. "I've been with the company for a long time, and I've put in a lot of work. I feel like I've contributed in ways that go beyond my job description. And I want to know what opportunities exist for someone like me." Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting to the papers in front of him. Zoe pressed on, not giving him a chance to deflect. "I've been passed over for promotions for years, and I'm not sure why. I know I'm not the only one, but I'm ready to have this conversation. I've earned more than this. I deserve more than this." Mark's face faltered for a moment. There was a long pause, a silence that hung between them like an unspoken truth. Finally, he spoke. "Zoe, you know I respect your work ethic," he said, his voice more serious now. "But promotions aren't just about doing the work. They're about fitting into the right mold, the right image. You've done great work, but it's not just about that. It's about leadership, visibility, things that are harder to measure." Zoe's heart sank, but she didn't flinch. She had heard these excuses before. "I understand that, but I've never been given the chance to show leadership in a way that matters. I've been stuck in the background, but I'm ready to step up. I need to know what I can do to move forward." Mark's eyes softened for a moment, and Zoe could see the conflict in them. He was a part of the system, but he was also the person standing in front of her, the one who could make a difference. "I'll talk to HR," Mark finally said. "We'll see what we can do, Zoe, but I can't promise anything." Zoe nodded, but inside, she knew she wasn't relying on empty promises anymore. She was done waiting. The conversation had been a small victory, but she knew the real battle was only just beginning. As Zoe left the meeting, her mind raced with possibilities. She had taken the first step, but the path ahead was still uncertain. Would Mark follow through? Would the system change? The truth was, only time would tell. But Zoe knew one thing for sure. She couldn't afford to sit back and wait any longer. She had to keep pushing, keep advocating for herself, and keep striving for the recognition she deserved. And who knew? Maybe her story could inspire others to do the same. If you've ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or stuck in a job you know you're capable of more in, Zoe's journey isn't just her own. It's a story that many of us can relate to. Sometimes we need to be the ones to take the first step, to have the hard conversations, and to stand up for the future we want to build. Don't wait for someone else to give you the opportunity. Create it for yourself. If you found Zoe's story inspiring and want to see more content like this, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring these important stories to more people who might need to hear them. Leave a comment below and let us know if you've ever had a moment where you had to stand up for yourself in the workplace. Let's keep this conversation going and support each other on the journey toward change. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice matters. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.